Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Patrick, and others for organizing this. This is my second time in Japan. The last time was 17 years ago. Many things have changed. Very glad to be back. I'll quickly tell you what I do. I run several cybersecurity organizations and projects. One is the Digital Hub Cybersecurity, which is located in Darmstadt. I'm the managing director. We coordinate all commercializations of cybersecurity technology. The other one is, you might know that, Fraunhofer Society's Institute for Cybersecurity, the Fraunhofer SIT. Then I'm part of CRISP. CRISP is the largest applied cybersecurity research cluster in Europe. Now we have more than 500 scientists focusing on cybersecurity. And I'm also part of the ESPK, which is focused more on geostrategic studies. In this context, I also advise the German Department of Defense on cybersecurity issues. So shortly about Darmstadt. Why is cybersecurity located in Darmstadt, which is south of Frankfurt? As you see, Germany is very decentralized, so we have at least 12 technology clusters. For example, in Karlsruhe, we have artificial intelligence. In Munich, we have mobility, which makes sense if you've ever been to Munich with BMW and all the car industry. And I run the cybersecurity stuff in Darmstadt, which a lot of people don't know. Why is Darmstadt the epicenter in Germany for cybersecurity? The reason is that after Second World War, Germany needed a new center for all telecommunications technology, and that was established in 1949 in Darmstadt. 2 years later, the Allied forces, mostly the US, and the predecessor of what today is the NSA, they created the first crypto center in Darmstadt in a large military facility called Dagger Complex, which was then crucial for all crypto activities during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And most important, the so-called Deutsche Rechenzentrum DRZ, which was the first supercomputer in Germany. And the picture you see is the actual IBM mainframe. And a lot of people, my colleagues at my institute, formerly were working for IBM. So this is how our building looks today. We focus on mostly anything in cybersecurity. We do it. Our largest department, I think with 60 people now, is focused on automotive systems security. We have a large department for network security because we work closely together with Israel. We have an office in Tel Aviv, and we have quite a few Israeli colleagues that work with me in this building. We do IT forensics, we do cyber threat intelligence, and I'm mostly focused on cyber strategy and deterrence, which is what I want to talk about with you today. I think in the program it actually says detergence, but it is deterrence. It's an important differentiation. Why do I focus on cyber deterrence? Because a long time ago I had a classic military background. I served for United Nations in Sierra Leone for the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. That was in 1999 in the war, and then in Kosovo. So that was before cyber. And then I was in technology for a long time. And now through cybersecurity, I'm bringing these two worlds together. So why are we talking today about cyber deterrence? I'm curious, who of you has ever heard about cyber deterrence? The Europeans? Okay, got it. Yeah, one. Great. So as I see, it's a new concept here in Japan. It is becoming a very important concept in Europe. It has been a very important concept in the US and Israel for a long time, and now it is spreading. The word deterrence, most of us know it from nuclear deterrence, but in the context of cyber, it means something different. So let's first talk about the difference between cyber defense, which is what most of you have been talking about during this conference, and deterrence. So cyber defense is focused on weakening the effects of a cyber attack. This is what many of you do on a daily basis. This is your business. Cyber strategy and deterrence, something different. It tries to manipulate the behavior of your cyber opponent so that the attack does not happen. And in contrast to nuclear deterrence, where our goal was that there is no attack at all, because any nuclear attack would be devastating, in cyber, we have a different goal. The goal is not absolute deterrence, but the goal is to minimize the number, to reduce the number of attacks. So that's an important conceptual difference between nuclear deterrence and cyber deterrence. That's why some of my colleagues in the US have started to call this whole complex of strategizing cyber coercion or cyber strategy. But I'm using the term deterrence because it is a little clearer in the literature. So why is this important? Why is everyone talking, at least within NATO frames, about deterrence? Let's see, in our industry, in cybersecurity, there are 5 generations of products that we sold or are still selling to customers. The first generation started in the late 1980s. You all know it, antivirus technology, or as we call it, snake oil, because it is, as we know, not a real technology. It was more something to sell. Then there is the second generation in the 1990s, the firewall technology. Then third generation, application protection technology, early 2000s. A lot of corporate clients are still in generation 3 in terms of what they buy for their corporations. Generation 4, sandboxing, anti-bot technologies, start around 2010. And now, something interesting is happening. We are focusing on chip-level prevention technology, which is not easy to do. And why is this suddenly so important to go so deep in the Aussie layer to really care about chip-level prevention, as, for example, Apple is doing it? Well, one of the reasons is that we are facing government-sponsored large-scale multi-vector attacks nowadays. And what complicates this is that in the past, these attacks were exclusively within the range of the capabilities of governments, mostly the US and others. But the know-how, how to do these attacks, has proliferated. And now non-state actors, or even small states, And criminal groups can perform these types of attacks, which is a big problem. So, therefore, not only governments and nation states are more and more thinking about how to deter these types of attacks, but also large corporations. Sony is an example for this. Now, what exactly do I want to deter? The answer is ambiguous hybrid warfare. Some of you might hesitate when I say the word warfare, because we know that we have not seen a cyber war yet. There's no outright cyber conflict in the classic sense of the definition between two nation states yet, which is very good. So that's a success. However, what we have seen is a lot of tit for tat, a lot of exchange of attacks on a, we call it left of boom or below armed conflict threshold level. So some people say that the prelude to war actually is the war itself in cyber. And under this definition, we already are in a state of at least cyber conflict. So some people call it warfare, some call it attacks, some call it cyber operations. It all means the same. Cyber operations is now being used by the Tallinn Manual 2. So in a couple of years, we all might just use that term. So what does ambiguous mean? It means that my actions are deniable. I can launch an attack and later tell my victim that it wasn't me. We sometimes call that the big Russian lie. The second word, hybrid, what does that mean? It's a new term in military affairs. Basically, it means that you mix conventional forces, conventional capabilities with non-conventional capabilities. So I give you an example, how exactly ambiguous hybrid cyber ops or warfare looks like. Does anyone know who this is? I know you know this. Okay. This is the bronze soldier. It's a statue. It stood in the center of Tallinn, Estonia, beautiful city. And in 2007, the government decided to move the statue from the center to a park. Not a big deal, you might say, but it was a big deal because Estonia has a large Russian ethnic community, and this statue portrays a Red Army soldier from World War II. And the society in Estonia is basically torn in half. Some think that the Red Army did a good job, and the others think not so much. So what happened is they announced to move the soldier, the statue, and the Russian media picked up on the story and twisted it. And it turned it into a different story. So the news story was that this statue would not be moved to the outskirts, but it would be destroyed. In addition to that, they spread more news, fake news, for example, that the graves of soldiers would also be destroyed. We call this augmented information. Some call it fake news. This was phase one of this type of warfare. The result was unrest, hundreds of people were injured, one person died, I think 1,000 were arrested, and shortly afterwards, phase 2 of this type of warfare started, which was a cyber attack, a DDoS attack, which basically took out ATM machines, banking machines, slowed it down, communications of ministries. And as we know, this was a very important experience for the nation of Estonia and changed everything in Estonia. We have seen more grave attacks, more grave, ambiguous hybrid cyber attacks in the Ukraine, where the target was not only to take out banking machines, but actually there they targeted SCADA networks and electric power grids. So this is what we want to deter, because no nation state wants this to happen. It has 3 kind of types: disruption, espionage, and degradation. What we mostly focus on are these 2. Mostly the third pillar, because you might say, why would a nation state want to deter espionage? Because it is conducting espionage itself. However, there is a bit of a red line. For example, my country was hacked a while ago. Basically the high point was last year. Our parliament was hacked, and you could say this is classic espionage. However, the German government didn't think so. So for the first time in history, 4 weeks ago, the German government issued an official declaration where it announced that it accuses Russia of this hack, and it warned Russia that this type of espionage attack is not acceptable. So these 2 types of things we want to stop: degradation and some parts of espionage. By MOD, I mean manipulation of data. MOP means manipulation of perception, and BOI means to alter the balance of information. These are things that nation states might want to deter. Why do I want to deter? This is actually a big debate. You might think that, well, it's just cyber. It's not so important. We should more focus on nuclear weapons or conventional weapons or other stuff. So there's a big discussion going on if these types of cyber operations are something really serious or something not so important. So this cartoon, I think, portrays it. Basically, what's happening is there's 2 camps. There are the hawks and the doves. The hawks, for example, Richard Clark, one of my teachers at Harvard, he used to be national security advisor, and he says that this stuff, these cyber weapons, it's a game changer. It will change everything. And then there is the other camp, for example, Thomas Reid, who is now at King's College. He says, no, this is not true. All the cyber operations is just a new form of espionage, and we shouldn't freak out. So I'm for transparency in the middle, leaning a little bit hawkish. And why is that? I base this on some new data that we have comprised in our project for our publications, and mostly Brandon Valeriano from the US Marine Corps University, who is one of the groundbreaking scholars on this topic. Brennan and others, we have looked at all major cyber operations over the last 10, 20, 30 years and have basically classified them along something new, which is along their strategic effectiveness. So we were not so interested in classifying them in terms of, is this a DDoS or APT or what is it? But we were interested in figuring out if these cyber operations had a real strategic impact on the enemy. And this has not really been done before. And to do this, we looked at the escalation potential of cyber attacks and compared it to classic strategic weapons or measures. For example, classic military power, which is nuclear, conventional forces, classic economic power. SYNC, you might know, is a composite index for national capabilities. And we also looked at if a country does a cyber operation and it has done many such operations before, if that changes the calculus. So that's what we call past cyber. And the result is interesting. Basically, one of our preliminary results is that the strategic effect of cyber operations is much weaker than that of classic military or economic power. Now, this is good. This is good to know. It means that some of the stuff we see is not as impactful as we think it might be. However, there is a trend which causes concern. In the past, we have seen cyber weapons that were, in terms of intrusion, pretty low quality. In terms of precision, low quality. And in terms of visibility, often hidden. However, we have seen, since Stuxnet, a trend towards the upper right quadrant here, which means we have highly visible, highly precise, highly intrusive cyber weapons. And they are proliferated throughout the world. And by proliferation, I mean, back in the days, this stuff, an APT like Stuxnet, could only be done by someone like Israel and the US. Now, some other players might be able to do this. And that's a reason for concern for the future. The second reason for concern is, traditionally, we have been dealing with cyber weapons within a very clearly defined domain, which is the military domain, where I want to protect airspace, maritime, and land through cyberspace. And if we have people from the military here, you know that the main focus of cyberspace in this scenario is to basically protect and enable military-grade communications and do certain type of special operations. But this is a domain where the internet is not pervasive. So this is its own closed domain, and I might be able to exert a lot of control. However, the new domain that we want to protect is much larger. For example, if I look at this map, this is a global, so-called global risk interconnectedness map. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it shows you risks that we face as societies and how they are connected. For example, there's a food crisis there. On the top, there's natural disaster. You know, it's all these types of, there's a fiscal crisis, all these types of crises. Now, cyber, as we know, has become very important for many verticals, for the economy, for society, for democracy. Some people say that cyber security overlaps with physical security and personal security and corporate security. So what we've seen is that this area is becoming bigger and bigger and more connected with the rest. Meaning all the stuff in red here is connected to cybersecurity. This has led to militaries all over the world to redefine their doctrinal approaches. For example, in Germany, if you read our military strategy, what the German army should protect, it now officially says not just the classic military domain, but also the so-called information space, which is everything. And back in the days, we meant critical infrastructure like nuclear power plants and stuff, but now we mean everything, like how Siemens communicates, how we do elections. It's basically everything. And that's a problem because that creates a very large attack surface. So that's the second reason for concern, that what is currently true, that cyber weapons have so far not, created a large strategic effect on the enemy, might change in the future. Now, the third reason is the Matrix. Last time I was in Tokyo, that movie came out, and we all know the movie The Matrix, and the question is, what is the Matrix? And the answer is, it depends on who you are. So the third reason why cyber weapons in the future might become strategically more effective is we might not be able today to imagine the cyber weapon of the future. One of my teachers, he called it the unknown unknowns. We think we can predict, but we might not be able. Why am I saying this? Let's take Stuxnet. In the Stuxnet case, the Americans looked at Stuxnet, and for them, Stuxnet was a proof of concept for a cyber weapon that can sabotage a critical infrastructure. They said, okay, that's my weapon. I'm doing this, that's working, okay. For the Russians, they might have looked at Stuxnet and they saw something totally different. Perhaps they saw that an Iranian admin at the power plant looked at his screen and believed the screen more than the physical data he had. And they were like, oh, that manipulation of data is the actual weapon, not the sabotaging act. So some people say that Stuxnet was an eye-opener for the Russians in terms of how they would hack elections in the future and others. They would manipulate data, they wouldn't have to destroy it. So this is a third reason for concern. Now, I want to quickly move to how to deter, because this is what we all want to learn. What can we do? First, the rule of law, very important. We are in a legal setting here. We had the telemanual around 236 pages, and now we have the telemanual 2, double the size. It's like nearly 600 pages. Who has read the whole thing? Okay, nobody has. The truth is, the rule of law is not working in cyberspace. Unfortunately, I very much hope it will. We have, though, no rules for the road in cyberspace yet. We have a couple of bilateral agreements, US, Chinese, German, Chinese, some other stuff. Forget it. It's not working. So the second tool we could use, if we have no rules, we could use the economy. This is what the Israelis do. This is from a friend of mine who is running what I run in Germany. He's running that in Israel. These are all Israeli startups. So what Israel has done very successfully, they identified key areas that need to be protected within their society. You know, e-commerce, enterprise mobility, cyber posture, blah, 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 the whole thing. And then they created startups in these buckets, or fostered them, or did investment. And they specifically are focusing on the stuff that's red, which is also dual use for the military. So you have basically cyber-physical systems in there, other stuff that can also be used for the military. So that's option one. And I know that there is a growing startup community and philosophy in Japan for cyber, and that's something very positive. Option number two is you want to make smart decisions within your leadership on what horse to bet on. Because there's a lot of stuff going on in cybersecurity, but what is going to really be important in a couple of years down the road? Well, nobody knows, but the people from Gartner tell us that they know and sell us their predictions for a lot of money. So this is one of the Gartner so-called hype indices. And it shows you which technology in cybersecurity is mature, so you can sell it within a framework of, you know, FireEye or Accenture or something. That's on the very right side. That's the plateau of productivity. That's stuff we already sell and package. And then on the very left side is the stuff that's kind of a little science fiction still. And often we see that these topics are hyped, and then there is a bit of a, they call it the trough of disillusionment, you know, because often we see, is my threat intelligence platform really performing? You know, is there really machine learning in it? Stuff like that. So what's interesting is, I think there are three areas that might be interesting for a society like Japan or Germany. One is hardware-based security, chip level basically. The other one is threat intelligence platforms. And the third one is very early, but breach and attack simulations. That's again, very useful for dual use. So the third thing you can do is naming and shaming. This photo up there, I could tell you the names of these four people because the Netherlands, this is the Secretary of Defense of the Netherlands, sitting there, one of her generals. Just 2 months ago, they did a press conference telling the world the names of these four guys. And these are Russian GRU special operations spies, basically. And this is a photo from the airport somewhere, and they're on the way to Amsterdam, I think, to hack the chemical something organization. So this is revolutionary that a government in Europe does that. It's never happened before. We call it naming and shaming. It's something you can do. Japan can do this. You tell your enemy that you know what he did, and you also tell your own population that you're not okay with this, starting a discussion within the population to prepare your population for the next attack where you might react with a counter-strike. So this is what's happening right now. Germany is doing the same. We call it naming and shaming. Also, you criminalize these attackers, and pursue them through the courts, through Interpol and other stuff. It's very effective. The other thing is you can do sanctions. The Americans like to do that a lot. Economic, diplomatic, we've seen that President Obama did this after the election hack. He kicked some diplomats out of the country. That's another option you have as a nation state. And finally, you can create a cyber command. So we did that in Germany. This is the logo of the German Cyber Command. It sits in Bonn, and we are now integrating it with our Bundesamt für Sicherheit, BSI, which is run under the Ministry of the Interior, and with the intelligence community. And it's a very complicated thing to integrate these players in cybersecurity, and I'm sure in Japan, very smart people are thinking about how to get this right. So this basically leads me to what my project has been working on. It's a framework, we call it Agile Cyber Deterrence, which combines all of the above. This is our copyrighted, not really, definition of Agile Cyber Deterrence. What's important here is that it's a mix of denial, cost imposition, and supporting strategies, I'll get to that in a minute, in domain as well as out domain. So within cyber, but also outside of cyber. And what's really important is you want to deter not only the classic armed attack as the UN defines it, Article 51 or 2, but you want to also deter the stuff that happens left of boom, that happens before the actual legal attack takes place. So our framework is based on 4 pillars. First, you want to define what an attack is and signal it, communicate it clearly to your enemy so that he knows, oh, if I do this, I'm in trouble. This means basically that you need to define for your society what is really crucial and what is not. And we in Germany currently focus on the very right end of this, which is SCADA, critical infrastructure, stuff like that. But also an election. An election might be a taboo, You might signal to your enemy to hack your election. Okay, it's not a nuclear power plant, but still, you don't want that. So this is important for your society to figure out what is a taboo and what is not. Then I don't have to talk about denial. This is what we all deal with. We want to increase cyber resilience, our defenses. Cost imposition is a very, very controversial topic, as you all know. How can you do offensive stuff, especially as a country like Japan or Germany? It's very difficult to say. How can you at all raise the cost of an attacker? It's a big discussion about it. We don't have time to go into this. Supportive measures is everything that the intelligence community does, embedded attribution, stuff like that. So finally, what are policy options for cyber middle powers like Germany or Japan? Well, for Japan, it's interesting because you're in a difficult spot. There's China that wants to bridge the external gap. They want to catch up. It's mostly with the US, so they have engaged in theft of intellectual property. That's bad. That's fostering their agenda. What's good for us is they also focus on internal issues. They don't want to have a revolution from inside, so they might be occupied with that. Russia is revanchist, as we know. They are in a weak position. They want to get bigger. They're expansionist. But the good thing is they have a low budget. So then you come to the US. They have domain superiority, not just in cyber, but in other domains. That's bad for enemies of the US, good for its friends. What's also good for the US's enemies is the US is always very hesitant to use its capabilities because they don't want the enemies to know about it. So there's a bit of an equilibrium here. Talking quickly, because I run out of time, about China. Japan is facing something that my colleagues in Australia call picking flowers in foreign countries and making honey at home in China. So one thing that Japan is facing is basically, they look at technology in Japan, they look at know-how at universities, they might bring it back to their own turf and use it for their own cyber capabilities. So this is something you should have on the screen. There's a new study about this from the Australian Institute for Strategic Studies. And finally, there's a lot of stuff happening in the mergers and acquisitions market. Big players, I mean, you have SoftBank, but big players are buying up cybersecurity startups all over the board. It's a boom for cybersecurity mergers and acquisitions. The market is now 95 billion. It's projected to be 365 billion in 2026. That is huge. So you want to get your M&A market right. Finally, the message I just want to, bring from Germany, so to say, to you, as a cyber middle power, you can actually have strategic influence if you partner with others within a network structure that has specific capabilities assigned to the partners. So there's a long theory in international affairs about the network view of power for middle powers like Japan or Germany. And now what's happening is we apply this to cyber power. So one thing that Germany is doing right now, we are partnering with the Netherlands, with France, with Luxembourg, with Estonia, with other middle powers, so to say, form coalitions of the willing to basically have a better posture in cybersecurity vis-a-vis the cyber superpowers such as China, US, or with the US, Russia. And I think a partnership between Germany and Japan would be something valuable, potentially valuable in the future, in the space. So that's it. If you're bored, you can read about all this in this little publication or send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. I thank you very much for your time and look forward to the discussions. Thank you.